Welcome back to Quantum Yoga Podcast. Excited to have Alex Fergus on the show. So thanks, Alex, for coming on.
No, thank you. Thanks for reaching out, and yeah, it's great being here.
Well, before I get into the milieu of questions, just give the listeners sort of a 101 on Alex Fergus and what you're up to.
Okay, sure. So I live in New Zealand, grew up here, focused on sport performance for a big chunk of my life, and have suffered many ups and downs from the health point of, a lot of up and downs on the health side, as well as on the performance side as well. And a combination of wanting to perform better and then suffering those health issues has kind of led me down many rabbit holes. And then now today, I don't know, I consider myself a bit of what do I say, a health nutter as well as a health nut. Like I'm sort of obsessed with this, but then some of the stuff I do is a little bit outlandish to many people. But yeah, now I work online and I do a lot of blogging and share a lot of my findings and insights with people around the world. So that's me.
What was this physical performance training or movement style that you were doing?
Yeah, well, I've done many things. So I just turned 30 a few weeks ago, and looking back, I probably started. I mean, I was playing sports since I was like 4 or 5 years old, but serious sport was around, I don't know, 14, 15. Played a lot of rugby because that's what everyone does here in New Zealand. Like you kind of have to play it, I guess. So I was pretty focused on that. But then I actually got into rowing. So I know in the States you guys call it crew, sculling, so in the boat. So I got into that and I was doing really good in that. And I'm quite short for a rower. Like I'm 5'10", but I actually dieted down to the lightweight class. So it's like 70 kilos, 72 kilos, which is, I don't know, it's not more than 50 pounds, I think. And that was all through kind of, my teenage years. And I think actually looking back, that was a start of why I had so many health problems, because here I was, like my family are all quite stocky, solid build. And I was probably going down that path. And then all of a sudden, through puberty and everything, and then all of a sudden I was dieting all the time, restricting calories and always starving for weigh-ins. And combine that with the training I was doing, which is, I remember one season I was doing 10 to 12 sessions a week for about 9 months of the year. And we're talking, everything from 2-3 hour rows, just nonstop rows, to, massive interval sessions. And, so a combination of doing that for a couple of years with the dieting, and not knowing much about health at that point. So that was a big chunk of my sporting life, the rowing. And it was fun. I mean, I did all right at that. And then from there, I just burnt out. And what else did I do? I actually went from rowing into powerlifting, one extreme to the other. I never really touched the weight of my life. So I got into powerlifting and did really well there, broke some records, qualified for worlds with powerlifting. And some natural bodybuilding, and it was just more learning about dieting and health, I guess, came into it a little bit. And then after the bodybuilding, that's when I really, like, everything sort of caught up with me. And I spent about 2 years just completely out of all sports, just kind of figuring out what went wrong and trying to undo the damage. And that was, about 5 years ago, and 6 years ago now. And now today I just kind of focus more on health and longevity, looking after my joints and everything like that. But I still do like performing and training heavy and training hard. So just doing it for the love now.
I had a similar story in my own process, and I was just not listening. I was not listening to my body telling me to chill out. And so I started pushing and pushing and pushing to kind of overcome that. And the first thing that really just totally fell apart was, when I think back on it, the first thing that was the major indicator was just not recovering. and not really noticing
Hmm.
that process of
Hmm.
recovery, and then just continuing to push. And what sort of broke this whole thing for me was sleep, and
Yeah.
not being able to sleep, and it just like snowballed from there. And I wonder, what was that straw that sort of broke the camel's back for you in your training, where you're just like, oh damn, what?
Yeah. It was after the bodybuilding. It's funny you mentioned like the recovery side of things, and it's true. Like I've heard people say, "Oh, there's no such thing as overtraining," and I almost like I think I believe that now. It's not necessarily overtraining, it's just under recovery, right? Like you just go, go, go. And sure, if you're supplementing with, questionable drugs and doing all these fancy biohacks and stuff, maybe you can handle that sort of training load. But yeah, it's definitely the under recovery. And so for me, it was pushing too hard for far too long. And then eventually it just caught up with me. And so I remember clear as day, it was I did 2 years bodybuilding, two seasons bodybuilding. The first season, I was new to it. I was seeing all the change in my body. It was amazing, dieting down. Or I got as big as I had ever been in the off season. Like it was quite, quite massive. And I was like, this is cool. And then of course, dieting down, it's like revealing this like sculpture you've been working on. It was really fun, and that was driving me and the desire to win and compete, which was a strong desire of mine, was driving me that first year around. And the 12 weeks dieting down for that, I was pushing the body very hard. So of course, I was severely limiting my food intake, but I was taking like I was taking caffeine tablets. I don't really drink coffee. I've never really been a fan of it, but I think I got up to taking, what was it? It was worked out to be about 10 to 12 cups worth of coffee in capsule form a day for like, the 5, 6 weeks leading up to my show. And I was just downing that, because I thought you had to. And I was doing like nicotine gum and doing all these interval training and, fasting and everything. And it was just like, all right, I felt miserable. I was cold all the time, no libido, but that was just part of bodybuilding, right? I just, whatever, shrug it off. And did the competitions, won both the competitions I went into, like won the national titles and everything. So it was great. And then afterwards, I just didn't recover. Like I was thinking, all right, well, I'll go back to my normal diet now. And I never shrug off that kind of lethargic, low libido, gut issues, all these sort of niggling things that had reared its head during that dieting phase. I couldn't get rid of them. And I didn't understand much about health then. I just like, oh, well, I've got to rest it off and eat more. And then, of course, everyone's saying I need to compete again next year and back up my wins. So I'm back in the gym training. And I noticed like everything was a lot harder this time around. Like motivation to train just wasn't there. My strength was just gone. Recovery from trainings, like I just couldn't bounce back. And what actually happened, I ended up doing the second season, competing, but there was no joy. Like deep down, I was actually looking forward to the season being over. And I was meant to do two shows. I pulled out of the first one because I just didn't feel ready, and so I just saved myself for the nationals. But yeah, like honestly, even the day of the show, I was just counting down the hours to go home and forget about it all. Whereas the year before was like I'm loving every single moment. When's the next show type thing. So it was definitely after that first season, and the second season just made things worse. But it was a miserable sort of time, and it took me a long time to get out of that hole as well.
Well, let's talk about this aspect of recovery. You have some excellent articles on your blog, by the way. I just wanted to applaud you on what you're putting out there.
Thank you.
Tell us about recovery and sort of the big pieces of recovery. What are the big hitters when you want to include something in your regime?
Sure. So the first one is sleep. I mean, you mentioned it before. I didn't really. It was crazy. Like during those years as a bodybuilder, part of the reason I wanted to do bodybuilding was to help my career. Like I was a personal trainer in the gym, and I had the endurance background, I had the strength background, but I didn't really have the body composition background. So I was like, all right, well, the bodybuilding is going to help with that. So here I was, someone who had been involved in sport, health and fitness. That was my job. That was my career. I'd done the qualifications, and I thought I knew everything, right? And it's crazy because like I didn't even talk about sleep. I didn't even think about sleep during all those years. Even when I was bodybuilding, like you just, I don't know. I think I was getting like 5 hours of sleep because I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning or 4:30 in the morning to go to the gym to start work, and then of course, you're with clients all day. Clients in the evening. By the time you get home, you clean up, you do your meal prep for the next day. You're not getting in bed till like 11, 12 o'clock. Like, I didn't even think about sleep. And I don't know why that, like, looking back, it's like you're such an idiot, Alex. But I think that's just society, right? Like, we just don't really put any emphasis on our sleep. And meanwhile, the point of this story is like I was spending all this money on these supplements, and like I was starting to play around with compression tights and what else, like cold and stuff like that, cold therapy. And I was doing all these a little bit alternative. Well, they weren't really alternative because so many people were using them, but like they were I was avoiding the low hanging fruit, and I was reaching for the top of the tree to get these like small wins. Whereas like sleep and my quality, my diet and stuff was just not a thing, not really a priority. So sleep now for me is like my biggest priority. I mean, I won't book podcast interviews late at night or early in the morning. And I travel, if there's a dinner or something on, I'll try and make it as early as possible and stuff. Like it's that important. And so anyone that comes to me looking to optimize their performance or health, fat loss, anything, like I spend a lot of time working with them on how important sleep is, and yeah, just sort of teaching them on how it does impact health and why it is so important. Because like I said, like I just think we're in a society that kind of neglects it, and in a way we wear this badge of honor, like, oh, I only got 4 hours sleep last night, look at me, and it's almost celebrated. So sleep's the first big thing that I personally work on and educate my clients on when it comes to recovery, but also performance as well.
Yeah, so glad you brought this up. And I know you're a fan of the Aura Ring. I also use this with my clients. And I'm sure you've been able to glean a ton of information from working with your folks and using this ring. And so my question is around patterns that you're seeing. Are you seeing patterns of sleep disorders or deep sleep dysfunctions across a larger audience? And where do you think that symptomology is stemming from? What do you think the causality is behind that? And there's kind of a second piece of that question, which is talk to us also about the relationship to quality sleep and body fat percentage.
Okay, so yeah, I'll start from the start. I definitely do see a lot of data coming in through my clients and stuff. And to be honest, I mean, I don't think I've worked with anyone that has come to me really understanding the importance of sleep, like from the get-go. Maybe someone comes to me and they know a little bit about, I don't know, the importance of gut health or something like that. But it's always like this when I educated them on that, they're always like, wow, this is full on. Like, I didn't know that. So pretty much all the data I'm seeing starts off pretty bad, pretty rough. And even those that are, improving their sleep, like, like to have quality, a good night's sleep every single night is hard to achieve in today's life. So things I'm seeing that I often see, firstly, it's just inconsistency around bedtime. That's the first thing I'm looking at when I look at their data. Like if they're going to bed at 10 o'clock one night, midnight the next, 9:30 the third night, 1 a.m., like straight away, I'm like, all right, well, that's a big reason why your sleep's all disrupted. Like stable circadian rhythm, stable bedtimes, stable wake times, all these things so important when it comes to fine-tuning, optimizing your sleep and, the body throughout the day as well. So you can go down a whole nother path there. But that's the first thing I'm looking at, and I really see consistency. And it's just because the world we live in today, I mean, you got dinners, you got late night meetings, you've got your favorite TV shows. And again, it goes back to that priority. People don't really prioritize the sleep. So I always tell my clients, even adults need bedtimes. Like we have kids and we tell them, all right, got to be at bed at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. But then something happens when we become an adult, we no longer need those rules. But, I don't think that's the case. I think we need a stable bedtime. So that's something I'll always see. Well, not always see, but I often see, and I'll try and tell my clients to fix. And once they can fix that, then you can actually start looking a little bit deeper into what's going on with sleep, throughout the night, especially with the Oura Ring, which shows so much data. So other things I'll see is a lot of frequent waking throughout the night. And again, this is why I like the Oura Ring, because it is so accurate around wake times and everything like that. So for instance, I've had a few clients who every sort of sleep cycle around that 60 to 90 minute mark, they're waking up, 6-7 times a night. And sometimes they're not fully awaking, but the ring is showing they're briefly waking up, and you can look at their movement and they're moving around. So that indicates there's something probably going on with airways, airways and breathing and everything like that. So for those clients, I'll work with them on, how they're sleeping. They're sleeping on their back or on their side, like pillows, mattress. Maybe there's some changes that need happening there. I'll get them to experiment with mouth taping to help the person breathe through their nose. And if there are a lot of issues there, then I'll send them off for further investigation. And it comes back that they've got sleep apnea or breathing restrictions. So that's a pretty common one. That frequent waking around the sleep cycles, every 60 to 90 minutes. So that I see that pattern quite a bit. What else do I see? I see, like with the Oura Ring as well, you can see your resting heart rate throughout the night. And so a lot of my clients, I'm seeing the resting heart rate isn't happening until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, which is quite late. I mean, it should be happening at least in the first half of your sleep time. Bedtime, nighttime, whatever you want to call it. And so a big reason behind the delayed drop in heart rate can be a late night meal or stress, like late night stress as well. So that's another thing I'm looking for, and I often see it with new clients as well before they're kind of up to speed on all this stuff. So for them, it's looking at, all right, well, let's space out your meal times. Let's not eat your biggest meal at night or your biggest meal of the day 20 minutes before you go to bed, or half an hour before you go to bed or something. If they have to eat late, then try and make that meal a little bit smaller and eat bigger meals during the day, things like that. Caffeine as well. That caffeine and alcohol, actually, both of them will impact the heart rate and the HRV scores, and that's quite clear. Come the weekend, where I know some of my clients are out having a few wines, and you see the drop off in their sleep on the weekend. So all this data, you asked about patterns. These are all the patterns I'm seeing, and the cause and effects of those. But then you'll have a client who is a little bit more dialed in, and maybe they're not drinking, and maybe they're single and don't have family, and they can follow the perfect schedule and stuff. And with those clients, then you start getting a little bit more advanced. Like then you're looking at things like bedroom temperature, how that is impacting the sleep, mattress quality, and mold exposure, things like that. Like you start looking at the environment. Dirty electricity, if their bed's close to a power plug, maybe moving the bed a few meters, and that's getting a little bit more advanced. So there aren't as many patterns there, because that's, a little bit more unique to the individual as to what's going on. But all the big issues, like I said before, all around sleep hygiene, just routine, meal times, bedtimes, stress, what they're eating, what they're drinking. So when you're sleeping, that's obviously when the body's repairing and recovering from today's stresses and everything. And there's a bunch of hormones that are released throughout your sleep, and these hormones can actually be disrupted by, well, firstly, lack of sleep, but frequent waking, light, for instance, can suppress some of these hormones as well. But the hormones released, hormones like melatonin, growth hormone. So melatonin is people think of it as a sleeping hormone, excuse me, but it's actually more of like a darkness hormone. So when the sun goes down, there's no light in our environment. That's when melatonin is secreted. But melatonin also does a lot of other things on the body, and this is a little bit off topic here, but it does help with it has like antioxidant effects in the body, and there's even research now coming out showing how melatonin's linked to, or low melatonin leads to like a higher risk of breast cancer and stuff like that. So it's not just sleep. Like, it's not just melatonin helps with sleep. It's melatonin helps with the body and immune function and everything like that. So that's one hormone that comes out during nighttime, or is released at nighttime. But in regards to fat burning and recovery and everything like that, growth hormone is your big one. That's the one you want to maximize if you are serious about training, sports, recovery, but also body composition as well. So growth hormone, testosterone, all these sex hormones are all potent fat burners. And again, disruption in your sleep cycles, lack of sleep is all going to, cause these hormones to be suppressed, and you're not going to get the most out of what could have been a good night's sleep. Then there's also things like lack of sleep. It only takes 1 or 2 hours of, let's say everyone's sort of different, but let's say you need 8 hours of quality sleep, right? There's a bunch of papers coming out showing how, like, 1 or 2 hours off this ideal time, so 6 hours sleep, for instance, can will completely alter your your insulin sensitivity. And all it takes is one night of sleep deprivation. And, so people spend so much time and energy focusing on the food they're eating, and maybe they're going low carb or like ketogenic, or, they're taking things like bitter melon extract when they're having carbs to help with, like, glucose uptake, because they're worried about diabetes and all that, which is great, fair enough, cool. But then they won't even think about their sleep, and of course they'll have a bad night's sleep. And from a hormonal point of view, like, all this damage has been done despite the perfect diet, or what some people would call the perfect diet the day before. So it really is that important. Then you've got things like cortisol and stress, which, going back to what we were saying earlier about performance, like, it really does come down to how well you're recovering. And if you're getting up at, say, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to go to that spin class under loud music and bright lights with an instructor screaming at you, I mean, that's a stressor on the body, right? And not only are it's a huge stressor on the body. That's what it is. Like, that's how you benefit from the training. But not only are you introducing the stress, you're doing, like, the opportunity cost of that is an extra hour, maybe hour and a half of sleep. So, if you look at the stress equation balance, or stress balance, you're losing out on a lot of beneficial sleep, which is helping the recovery, which is helping you handle stress throughout the day. And instead of that, you're adding on all this extra stress. You know what I mean? It's kind of crazy. I mean, at least, like, I tell clients who are trying to lose a bit of weight and already have a high stress life, I'm like, hey, look, just sleep in. Don't worry about that early morning class. And if they're like, no, I've got to get up, then I'll say, all right, well, get up at your 4:30 or 5:30 or whatever it is, but just relax, like, read a book. I mean, you're still losing an hour and a half of that sleep, but at least you're not adding in that extra stressor, right? So just getting your head around the importance of sleep for health and recovery, and the fact that it's helping you become more resilient to those stresses that we're exposed to during the day. Once you understand that, then that will help with that mindset change, and be like, oh, well, maybe I should get to bed a little bit earlier, or I should sleep in, or, maybe I shouldn't get up every morning and tell everyone how I only got 5 hours sleep, and act as if it's a good thing.
Your spin class example, it sounds like it almost sounds like maybe 200 years into the future, it could be misconstrued as a torture technique that people are actually paying for.
Oh, totally. I think that can be said about any gym, though. Like, if you took someone who had never seen a gym, or like weight equipment or anything, and you just took them into a gym and walked around, and you saw all these people grunting and moaning and sweating with these, like, big heavy duty, like, steel machines, you'd probably think, well, what the hell is this place? Like, is this some torture chamber? And then you see the personal trainer is, like, yelling, one more, 2 more reps. I mean, it is a pretty crazy place. And it's funny because people say, oh, like, I'm not into biohacking and stuff, but I had this thought yesterday. I was like, going to the gym and lifting weights is effectively a form of biohacking, right? Like, there's no, like you're effectively tricking the body or doing something to the body to create the beneficial effects of weight training or interval training, whatever you're doing, the increased load on the joint and all that sort of stuff. Like the natural way to do that would be to go, I don't know, chop firewood or dig a hole or plant a garden or, plow a field or something like that. So the gym is a form, I guess, of biohacking in a way where you're fast tracking the results through artificial means.
You mentioned late night stressors as a potential cause of late sleep, resting heart rate, stabilization, as well as late meals. But can you explain more the types of stressors that are pretty typical that people are experiencing to cause that?
Yeah, sure. So I touched on the food, and that's a big one. I experimented a while ago with a ketogenic diet and one meal a day. And I would never recommend anyone doing this, but I just played around with it so I could, get a bit more insight into what people were doing. And I was having, I don't know, probably 4,000 calories from maybe 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. At night, right? And then it was over winter time, so of course I was going to bed quite early, maybe like 9 o'clock, like 9:30. And I noticed straight away that my sleep score, my aura ring just plummeted. My resting heart rate was ridiculous. Like it was about in its 60s those nights I was eating those big meals. I mean, that's an extreme example, but it just shows like having all this food coming in, your digestive system is working overtime as you go to bed. And then plus lying down, it's sort of not really helping the gut from a digestive point of view when you're lying down. And some of those nights I remember like burping up, stomach acid and stuff. It was horrible. So that, again, that's an extreme example, eating 3,000 calories like an hour before you go to bed. But even having a really heavy meal, close to bedtime, that can have a big impact on your sleep. And clients who have experimented with fasting or, maybe smaller meals in the evening and bigger meals at breakfast time and stuff, they'll notice like how their deep sleep score often increases quite a lot, how the sleep latency, time to fall asleep, improves a lot as well. So that's something you can play around with. The other one is, like I said, caffeine, alcohol. They all cause stimulant effect on the body. But then there's things like light exposure, social interaction. So I can't remember if this was a study or if it was just like an opinion piece, but I remember reading something a while ago showing how actually it was in the Perfect Health Diet book. I think that's what it's called, by Paul Germain. Anyway, and so he talked about how watching soap operas or like dramas on TV, where you've seen a lot of faces and interaction and stuff like that with people. He was, and again, I don't know if there was science to back this up or if it was just his thought, but he was saying like that can cause some form of stimulating effect on the body. I mean, you're interacting with people, so to speak, right before you go to bed. So that was interesting. I know from personal experience, watching thrillers and horrors, which personally I don't really watch, but even if we watch a drama that's a little bit more like exciting, that impacts my partner's sleep big time. Like we'll watch a movie before going to bed, and if it is kind of like edge of your seat sort of stuff, then we'll take another hour afterwards just to wind down from that. So things like that. I mean, you want that time before your bed to be relaxing, quiet. It's a wind down time. It's not all right, let's go watch end of the world movies on TV and, scary films and all that. So it's just protecting that time around your bedtime. And again, light, like that's the big one. So do you want me to go into light and blue light? Or
that'd be great. But I do want to interject one thing here about when you're talking about programming, TV, video, however you're accessing these film programs. It's like fascinating as I kind of learn, because I've been getting into a lot of reading QEEGs, brain mapping, et cetera,
Nice.
and as we start to slow brainwave states down and we're in this relaxed state, as we naturally should, as we enter into sleep, we are slowing down into deeper and deeper levels of brainwave activity that are really, we can get as low as theta before actually falling asleep. And theta
Well,
is this zone where, human beings are highly programmable in this
hmm
zone. And the content of what one's watching it's more than just it's more than just a hormonal reaction that happens in order to become stimulating. There's actually a programming of the subconscious mind with that content, because you've slowed. Now, that doesn't occur during normal waking life to the same extent, because the beta wave activity in the analytical mind prevents that from happening. But as I started to think about the implications of what I was watching closer to bedtime, I was like, dang, this is having some serious, long-lasting, permanent effects.
yeah, right. That's fascinating. I mean, you think about the name television and like the programs we watch, right? Like they always say, in a way, it's programming our mind, programming us, not only from the content, but obviously from like just how it's impacting our body. And it's huge. I mean, I personally don't like watching TV or movies. I mean, we don't really have TV, but if I watch like something on Apple TV or something like that, we've kind of got a rule now where it's always like kid friendly. And I guess what I mean by that is it's like it's not too scary, it's not action packed, it's
Mm.
not like blood and guts, it's just a nice drama, or to be honest, what we watch during the week, it'll be like a TV episode of something, not like a TV series, but like, I don't know, like a show on, like, I don't know, farming or Shark Tank or something, like something that you can, if you want that uh show or something at the end of the day to sort of wind down and escape from reality for 45 minutes, at least it's not going to like keep you up all night, thinking, oh my God, are there monsters in the closet? Or, what's going to happen tomorrow when, I get on the highway? I don't know. Like, but yeah, that's really interesting. And personally, when my fiance is not here, I just won't watch anything. Like I just go to bed and read my book, and I know I fall asleep so much faster anyway. So, not many people will do that though. People like their TV series and stuff. So
I will.
anyway,
I'm going to borrow that kid-friendly programming for my clients, and I will credit you, Alex. All right. So I love that term. I love that. Go ahead.
yeah,
Tell us
it's
about
honestly,
light.
yeah. Okay, so with light, I mean, I got into this a couple years ago when I started focusing more on sleep, and at that point it was just like, all right, well, I need to go to bed earlier. But of course, what was happening is you'd go to bed and you'd be lying in bed and you'd kind of have that tired, exhausted feeling in the body, but your mind was like alert and racing. And we kind of touched on that previously as well, like causes of those. But I couldn't really understand it. And then, of course, in the morning, you'd wake up to your alarm clock and you'd be like, you'd just feel horrible. You'd be like, oh my God, I just want another hour of sleep. And you'd promise yourself, you'd say, 7 o'clock in the morning, you're making breakfast, like half awake, and you're downing coffee to try to wake yourself up. And you'd say to yourself, all right, tonight, no TV, I'm getting to bed early, 8 o'clock, whatever, right? And of course, 8 o'clock comes around that night, and the last thing you want to do is go to sleep. You're like, I've got so much energy, I could go to the gym, like I'm not going to sleep now. So of course the cycle continues, and I couldn't figure out why this was always happening. And then I started looking into circadian biology and light cycles, and then everything started to make sense. So light is a very powerful stimulus on the body. We probably don't appreciate it unless you're reading some of this biohacking, quantum health sort of stuff, but most people don't really think about light. I mean, it's just a flick of a switch and we have light, right? But that light is, like I said, it impacts the body. It signals to the body that, hey, it's daytime, all right? And if you put your ancestral caps on for a moment, the light bulb was invented, I don't know, it was about 130, 150 years ago. Prior to that, the only source of light, I mean, prior to electricity and everything, the only source of light we would have had was through fire, candles, fires, stars, I guess, and the moonlight as well. Sorry, the only light at night, I should say. Of course, we have the sun as well. So once the sun went down, our light sources were limited, and all those light sources I mentioned, like the fire, candles, they're quite a warm light, like a lot of orange and red glow to it. Plus, they don't put out a lot of light. I mean, anyone that's had a night camping, or maybe the power's gone out and they're reduced to like candles around the home, you soon realize it's quite hard to read books with that amount of light. So as I learned all this stuff, I learned about how different wavelengths of light impact the body differently. So visible light is made up of, I don't know, a spectrum from about 380 nanometers through to about 750 nanometers. And within that spectrum, you get your violet, green, yellow, red, all those different colors in there. And so what happens is, I found, and there's a lot of PubMed articles, like a lot of research on this as well, blue green light around that 500 nanometer wavelength, that is quite stimulating on the body, and it actually suppresses melatonin production and can spike cortisol, right? So during the day, like, this is awesome, and I've written on my blog about the importance of morning light. During the day, we actually want this blue light. We want it hitting our eyes and hitting our body, because it does wake us up. It gets us going. It pretty much triggers to the body that, hey, look, the sun's up, it's daytime. And then come evening time, you actually want to limit this blue light because, again, it has that stimulating effects. And now, again, if you go back to putting your ancestral hat on and you think for a moment about this and tying it back into the candles and everything, when the sun went down, the sun was the only natural source of this blue light that we would have been exposed to, that humans would have been exposed to. So the sun is putting out full spectrum light. By full spectrum, I mean it's got all the colors, plus it's got a bit of infrared and UV. So it's got that blue light in it. When the sun goes down, that source of blue light disappears from our environment, right? Like, we didn't have iPhones, we didn't have LED lights, we didn't have halogen lights, we didn't even have incandescent lights until about 150 years ago. So when the sun went down, there was no blue light around. I mean, maybe from the stars and the sun, but it's very, very small amount. And the artificial light we had from the fires was really rich in the red light, like the warm oranges, the yellow. So we kind of, depending on what camp you're in, evolved this way, or adapted to this sort of environment. And we went from a high blue light during the day, and nighttime was low blue light, right? And if you look at what's happening from a hormonal point of view, it all ties into this. I mean, once the blue light disappears, then melatonin's released, that winds the body down, and we go to sleep, and we sleep deeper and all that jazz. But nowadays, we've got an endless cycle of this blue light. So of course, when the sun goes down, what do? We turn on our lights. And what do our lights consist of? Well, lots of blue light, lots of green light, the energy efficient light bulbs, which have a lot of these blue and greens in them. Very, like the place I just moved into, thankfully, I can still use incandescent light bulbs. So they're more of the warmer oranges and reds. When I was in Australia last year, Australia's actually banned the incandescent light bulbs because of, their poor energy rating. So you're kind of forced into using these white lights. And of course, these whiter, not what's the word? The whiter lights, from the LEDs and the halogens and the fluorescent light bulbs, they have a lot of this blue and green light in them. And of course, what that's doing at nighttime is signaling to the body, hey, look, the sun's still up. Despite it being 11 o'clock at night, we're sitting underneath these light bulbs. And it's not just the light bulbs as well. It's your phone, it's the TV, it's your computer. It's opening up the fridge and you get that wham of light coming in. That is effectively telling the body, hey, look, the sun's up. I mean, the only time we saw blue light 150 years ago was when the sun was up, right? So if we're getting a big dose of blue light right now, it must mean the sun's up. And of course, that's having a stimulating effect on the body, suppressing melatonin and increasing cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And then we go to bed and we wonder, we turn all the lights off, of course, when we go to bed, but we're still wide awake because the body effectively thinks it's like, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's a big reason why, so many people go to bed with that wired but tired feeling. And then, of course, in the morning, they wake up at 7 o'clock when the sun is coming up, but their body probably thinks it's, 2 or 3 o'clock based on the amount of time that they've been exposed to darkness. And that's why it's so hard to get up and running. I hope I didn't mess up that explanation. I feel like I went about it a bit of a long way, but I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I I think I think your connection to our ancestral development with light is really important for people to get, because that's easy to conceptualize, right? It's easy to get that, and also it's pretty shocking at the same time to think that light can be that powerful of an influence on our physiology. And to your point too, it's about this being an emerging field of health and medicine and study, at least here in the United States. It sounds like it probably also in your part of the world, but in other areas, Germany, there's a long history of the biophysics and biophotonics study, as well as Russia and some other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a growing field, which is exciting. I'm working on a blog article at the moment on red light, and how red LEDs can, boost thyroid production and ATP synthesis and all this sort of stuff. I mean, it's amazing stuff, and it's like, why are we not using more of it and more people getting into it? And then, of course, it always goes back to, drug companies probably not being able to make millions of dollars off a single LED. But anyway.
I'm glad you said that. Okay. So let's talk about HRV and how you use that with your clients and how you view it, because there's so many lenses that this can be looked at. And so many different parameters of HRV that can be looked at as well.
Yeah, it's something that I've been using. I actually started tracking HRV, I think it was second year bodybuilding. So 5, 6, 7 years now I've been using it myself. But even to this day, I'm still like learning about it and trying to figure out, what the data exactly means. I'm getting better at it, but there's just so much to, well, it's such a new field, I guess, not just for myself, but like for the world, I guess. I mean, they're still trying to connect all the dots and find the best way to measure it. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, HRV, heart rate variability, you're looking at the time between beats of your heart rate and a consistent time between beats. Let's say you're beating 60 beats, your heart's beating 60 times a minute, which would imply that the time between your heart rate is, or heartbeat is 1 second, right? But what's found is that time actually alters. So it might be like 0.9 seconds and then 1.1 and then 9.95 and then 0.92. It varies. And that's what's been measured, the time between the beats. And it's been found that a consistent, steady heartbeat is a sign of low HRV, which is actually a bad thing. And I know that sounds counterintuitive because you'd think, well, you want something nice and consistent, but it's been shown that the opposite is true. And there could be some merit, like, I know musicians will always swear by like the real life recording of a drummer, drum beat versus like a automated computer beat, which is precise, every 1 second versus the human that has a little bit of variation in his beat. So I don't know, maybe it's a way of nature just, being real and not automated. I don't know. But anyway, that's how it works. And so there's all this data coming out showing how like low HRV rates is linked to all sorts of things like what have we got? We got like higher risk for cardiovascular disease. You've got just general fitness, health and fitness. You got thyroid health, all these sort of things. It indicates a higher state of your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight and flight. I think I've got that right. Yeah, fight and flight. State, autonomic stress state. So you can use this data to see how one is I don't know, what one's health is from a hormonal stress point of view. You can use this data to see how you're how you're handling the new training load. You can use this data to see how a particular diet's impacting the body. And of course, you can use it to track recovery and performance. You might want to, if you're an athlete peaking for an event, you might push hard 3, 4, 5 months out. And then as you get closer to the event, you might start tapering off, and you can use your HRV score to see how well the body's, recovering from it. So, it's a pretty cool technology. And there are a few ways you can measure it. So I used to use the Polar H7 heart rate strap, and then I'd use an app called Elite HRV, which is a really nice app. And I'd do the test every morning to get my data, and I've got a couple years worth of data in that app. But now recently, the Oura Ring is also, updated their app to record, or they are recording HRV while you sleep, and then they'll give you an average in the morning. So now, having that data from overnight, where you don't have to put on a polar strap, it's pretty useful. I mean, it's another metric you can use when trying to optimize your health and performance.
So this, I'm glad you brought up the Oura Ring in this regard, because this is how I look at it. Well, one of the ways, anyways, I look at it now with my clients, and the Oura Cloud shows, and this is more for the listeners, I know you're aware of this, but the Oura Cloud, which is kind of accompanied extra data that accompanies what you would get in the app itself, shows every 5-minute scan through the night, which is really interesting. And I would love your take on what's going on there, because it's all over the place. There are moments of 5-minute scans where you will get numbers like you'll get like 80 milliseconds, and then 2 hours later, 15 milliseconds. And so there are pretty wild fluctuations that I see in this number.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? And I know there's a lot of people asking me. I've got a pretty detailed review on the Oura Ring, and I'm always updating it whenever they release new features. So of course, when they release this feature, I put a few screens up, and now I've got people reaching out with that exact question, like, hey, I've got variability within my variability, right? Like, because there are some wild swings. I'm looking at my data from a few nights ago. The average was 61, the peak was 91, and the low was 21. But then if you kind of smoothed out the graph, you would see a little bit of it starts quite low, and then it comes up, and then it sort of flattens out. Now, look, to be honest, I am still learning. I actually just got an email a few days ago from the Oura guys with some of their white papers on the heart rate variability, how it's been measured and what it's doing. So I'm still personally interpreting this data and like what it's actually meaning, because to date, like, I've just been used to getting that one number, right? Your average through the Polar. Actually, the Elite HRV app shows some other numbers as well, but that's what I've been used to getting, just one single number. And so now when you've got these trends and these graphs, I mean, it's fascinating. It's like, wow, it's like a whole new world of data out there, which is awesome. And yeah, some people are like, oh, well, is it accurate because it's all over the place? But then I wonder, like, if you wore your Polar strap and you had it sync into your Elite HRV app throughout the day, I mean, there's massive, it's all over the place, right? Like, all it takes is, you to remember that you were late for an appointment, and then there goes HRV. You walk up the steps and your HRV's thrown off. So, it's normal to sway up and down. However, you'd expect during nighttime to be a little bit more consistent, right? Unless, of course, you're having lots of nightmares, or I don't know, these loud noises happening outside. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a decent answer to that question yet. I know that their measurement is accurate when the body is at rest, which is why the Oura Ring only tracks HRV at night and not during the day, because as soon as there is a lot of movement, that the accuracy of their technology isn't as good. So Maybe if you are a light sleeper and you're tossing and turning a lot throughout the night, maybe that's impacting the accuracy of the data. Maybe, I'm not too sure. But then maybe, like, I don't know, maybe someone needs to go and do a full night HRV test at a sleep clinic or a science lab or something and see what the data looks like. Maybe it's perfectly normal to see these wild swings up and down. Um, I don't know. But what I do know is when you look at that data compared to, say, heart rate overnight and compared to like their sleep brackets, when you're in deep sleep and stuff, often you can see a little bit of a correlation. Like maybe it drops down when it comes up when you're in your deepest sleep. And, maybe there was a 20-minute phase during the night where you woke up because you did have a nightmare, and you can kind of see a bit of a correlation there. And yeah, for me personally, this is what I personally use, and I also tell my clients to use. I'm just looking at the average number, and then looking at the trends. And it was the same with Elite HRV because with the Polar app, because I know some mornings, you put the strap on before you get out of bed, and then other mornings you really need to go to the bathroom, then you go put the strap on. Other mornings you forget when to do, like you don't do it first thing in the morning, so you do it half an hour later. So there is some natural inconsistency. Sorry, my doorbell's ringing. There is some natural inconsistency with the data anyway, in which case I don't get too caught up on that day-to-day change, and I'll look at trends. I mean, because at least with the long-term or medium to long-term trends, those inconsistencies should sort of wash out, and you're still going to see if the body is taking a hit and your HRV score is dropping down. So, yeah, I mean, and that's just my personal view on it. Again, it's still new with Aura, and I'm still learning more about it. Maybe in a few weeks, I'll be able to decipher it a bit better. Maybe they'll put some content out as well, helping people understand it.
Let's talk a little bit more about circadian timing. You did talk about light and managing certain light frequencies within, a couple hours of going to sleep and making sure you're getting sun during the day. But there are some other pretty important circadian markers that the body needs. And you talked about meal times, and I wonder if you can just discuss that a little bit more. Are you finding there are optimal meal times? And also, and so let's put this more in the perspective of sleep, right? And our conversation's kind of revolving around that. But are there optimal meal times, not only dinner, but the other ones, as well as training times to optimize for sleep?
Yeah, so working backwards, I mean, training times, a generic circadian rhythm in humans, like everyone is slightly different and has, there are night owls and all that. But generally, if you took an average, I think it's around like 3, 4 o'clock has been shown to be the optimal time for most of your training. So I think it's like 3 o'clock has been found to when you have the best coordination and your best reaction time. I think it's a little bit later, maybe 4:35 is when you're meant to have best cardiovascular output and muscle strength. Whereas like in the morning, you have your lowest body temperature around 4 or 5 a.m. So, first thing in the morning may not be the best time to be trying to break a record, in your 5K or like, your squat PB. So that's the training side. And that's really interesting. Like when you do look at that data, and I've trained it all sorts of times throughout the day. And I've always found that my training's best in that afternoon, evening, early evening time. I think your body temperature peaks around 6, 7 o'clock as well. So again, closer alignment to those higher body temperatures should give you a little bit more performance benefits. And again, I'm not just sort of saying this on my own experience, even though it does align with it. There are like papers on this stuff. So that's where that comes in. Around meal timing, it's really interesting because, yeah, I mean, everyone has their favorite times of eating and they say, oh, no, like I never need breakfast, or, I do best when I have a big meal. But often people saying that are just saying that because that's all they do, right? Like they've adapted to that, and that's what they do. They don't have breakfast. They always have a big dinner, and they're functioning, and so that's what they prefer. But then, and I see this all the time with clients, but then when I do get them to change, at the start it's a big hurdle to overcome. Like if they're not used to having breakfast and I'm saying, look, have a big breakfast in the morning, it can be tough to get your head around, and they'll always say, oh, well, I don't need it. But then a few weeks later, then they turn around and be like, wow, like I feel so much better now. So without knowing what the other side is like, it's hard to say, I do better with no breakfast or whatever, because a lot of people just haven't experienced it. So what I'm starting to see now, with the more reading and research I do, and the more clients I work with, and the more experiments I do on myself, I'm finding that the simple rule is to eat your food when the sun's up. Like if you can sort of follow that sort of pattern, I'm finding, based on my research and everything, that people are getting the best results with sleep, with fat loss, with stable energy levels throughout the day, and all their health markers, that I'm tracking with their bloods and everything. I mean, there's obviously a lot of other factors at play as well, but that's the general sort of rule. And I know from firsthand experience that the late night eating close to bed is just not good for your sleep, and of course broken sleep is not good for overall health. If you look at things like leptin resistance, leptin and sensitivity and everything like that, then there is some indication that having big protein rich meals early on in the morning, pretty much as soon as you wake up, assuming you're waking up, with the sun, like at 6, 7 o'clock, depending on where you are in the world. There are some indication that showing, having the big breakfast, and then again, eating with the sun, like eating when at midday, and then maybe having a smaller meal in the evening time, before stopping, all food consumption for 2 or 3 hours prior to bed. That seemed to be beneficial, and that's actually the protocol I'll use with my clients who do have, weight loss goals. But again, I mean, I know people that are killing it in their sporting fields and they have good health and everything, and they're doing fasting, and like they're not eating until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So everyone is sort of different, but I still think, if you just want to over a general sort of broad recommendation, it's eating with the sun, and also going back to the fasting as well. Like I know people that are doing that successfully now, but I've also worked with a lot of clients who have come to me following some of these more extreme diets, whether it's ketogenic or lots of fasting, and it works well for 3 to 6 months, and then all of a sudden they start having all these problems, and it takes them a long time to sort of dig themselves out of it. So I don't know. I don't have a perfect answer for that. Sorry, but yeah.
Are you doing hormonal testing for your clients, or is this something you do?
Yeah, I do. I do with some of my clients. I use the Dutch test, the dried urine test, to look at like sex hormones and melatonin, cortisol patterns throughout the day, and then metabolites of those hormones as well. But you know what? Like I used to be, pretty much every client that came to me, it was a requirement that they'll do the test. But I've sort of softened my stance on that now, because I'm finding most people, pretty much everyone that comes to me has some hormonal imbalance or hormonal dysregulation. And again, a lot of the people coming to me are more, just your average Joe and Jane, who aren't that well clued up on circadian biology and all these things. So they sort of come to me, and I was doing all these tests and spending, $400 or $500 and getting everything done. But everyone was coming back with some sort of flaw or some sort of issue going on. And I was like, well, this is at the start of them coming to me. Like, I know I'm going to fix a lot of these things. There's a lot of low hanging fruit that we have to go out and pick first, right? So now I'm kind of holding off on some of the testing and doing that, say, 6 months into the program, where, then they can go out and be like, all right, well, I have made all these changes. I've still got some results to go. Like I've still got some progress to make. Now let's go out and get the tests and see what has improved, and what is working well, and what needs to be tightened up. So, there's still clients that come to me and they're super keen and they've got all the money in the world, and they're like, nah, let's do all the tests from day one. And that's great, because it may uncover something that, does require special attention. But, for the average listener out there, I mean, kind of save your money and, focus on optimize or focus on prioritizing your sleep, focus on eating sort of organic, focus on getting in the sun, grounding, moving the body, do all those basic things first, and use the money you've saved from the lab test to, buy the organic food or whatever it is, and do that for like 6 months. And once you've been doing that consistently, then maybe do the test. Because if you know there's an issue, and if you're tired all the time and you have low libido and you're not doing all these things, then is there any point to do the test and kind of confirm what you already know anyway? So that's how my sort of views on that have changed and are changing, yeah.
Hey, Alex, tell us if folks are interested in signing up for your coaching program or seeing you for a consultation or your sleep program. How do they do that?
Yeah, sure. So my website's alexfergus.com. So that's just me sharing my findings on health and wellness and everything. So I've got some pretty in-depth articles over there. I always seem to write pretty long blog articles when I release them. So check that out. You can find links to all my coaching programs. Or it's more of a lifestyle change program. I just simply call it the program because I don't know what else to call it at the moment. So once you go there, you'll be able to access that. I've got a sleep course on there as well. But to be honest, I mean, if you spend some time working through the blog articles on there, like you can probably implement a lot of those tips and recommendations I'm making in those articles, and get a lot of progress on doing things on your own. Like it's only if you really need a structured sort of approach or a helping hand that you may be interested in some of those coaching programs or sleep programs.